Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second session in the Innovation Zone. I think the aircon has come on now, so we're not going to roast, which is quite nice. It was a little bit warm there, wasn't it? Okay, so we talked around out of home and the luxury retail sector. One thing that we haven't discussed today so far, which I think is quite exciting and is certainly on most advertisers' agendas to do something, even if they're not quite sure what it is yet. But hopefully this session will enable them to understand exactly what they do need to do. So this session is all around AI and how you use voice activation in the advertising world. To guide us through that mirth, that tricky path, we have Mark Gorman, who's the CEO of Matrix Solutions.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeremy. So my accent clearly is not as beautiful as his, so you'll have to deal with that. And I will also note that my background, I'm German, so and actually that's my first language, so I'm starting 3 minutes late. For us, that's very heart-wrenching. So today we're going to be discussing voice and AI. And so before we jump into it, why don't we take a stroll back into history, way back. When the world started becoming, I told you it was a long time ago, when the world started becoming literate, the idea that you could learn, if there was something you wanted to know, it was in a book somewhere. That idea took hold. And I remember a time, and I'm just going to speak for myself. For some of you, you may relate. For some of you, this is pure history. There was a time before the internet was commercialized when you had a subject and you're like, oh, I got to figure this out. So you would go to note cards in the library and actually dig up books and spend 3 or 4 days trying to accumulate various books, newspapers, etc., that would discuss the topic about which you were interested. And then boom, the internet was commercialized and the early search engines started having actual people trying to guess what you wanted to review. So for example, my senior thesis in high school was, and this will give you an idea of my age, was about the competitiveness of the Japanese automotive industry. And so if I'm sitting at the internet typing that in, there's people actually saying, oh, he wants to look at this site, that site, et cetera. Then on the 4th of September, 1994, Google came out with their search engine. They said, we're going to do this totally different. Instead of people trying to guess what you want to see, we're going to start learning from other people's experiences and relate that to you. And so that's really how the idea of algorithmic learning started. And of course, for Google, they've been able to monetize this. And even today, it's almost 70% of their revenue. The other side of voice has to do with leaving the keyboard and having a conversation with a machine. That was born from IBM. So their first product that could do voice recognition came out in the early 60s. I mean, it's amazing how this stuff has, this history. Came out in the early 60s. How many commands do you think this could recognize? Any guesses? Come on. 500. Well, more than 2. 16, but not a lot, right? And so over time, that technology got better and better. And then in 2011, the first real commercially available product that married voice and AI, Siri, came to market. 2014, Amazon came out with the first smart speaker, limited offering, commercialized that. The next year, broad offering with Alexa and Echo. And then, ding dong, not the doorbell, but the first Chinese smart speaker came out in November 2016, and this industry is off to the races. So just as a frame of reference, my name is Mark Gorman, as Jeremy said. I'm from Matrix Solutions. Full disclosure, we primarily work with media outlets, so publishers. We work in broadcast, television, radio, digital publishing. We do have a small digital agency contingency. We sit in the sales side of the organization, so we are a technology company solely focused on media. We do CRM, pipeline management, budgeting, forecasting, reporting, and BI intelligence. So, the smart speaker. Of course, it's very new, right? But in the US, it's been taking hold. 1 in 6 US adults own this. I'm guessing that number is going up even as we speak. Large growth in this market, as you'll see later. Today, about, let's say, US market's about 88% of the global market today, which makes sense. Smart Speaker was first released in English, and then other languages came on, like, high population languages like German, French, and Japanese. Google Home has finally released a Spanish version, and I believe at this time the Alexa Spanish version is on pre-order in Spain. So it does make me wonder, what kind of Spanish is it speaking? Because I'm actually married to a Mexican, and I always wanted to learn a third language. So I said, well, let me take this opportunity, and please don't speak Spanish to me unless you ask me very simple questions. But I'm working on it. But I started off with a CD in the car, and it was Spain Spanish. So when I started speaking that at home, I was quickly reprimanded for lisping too much. But as we start to expand, we of course think about other avenues that we can reach. So I've got a little video clip coming up, and it's about how Alexa, many of you may have seen it, but it's about how Alexa is trying to hit the senior market here in the US.
The new Amazon Echo has everyone asking Alexa for help.
Alexa, what time is it? What the hell is wrong with this blasted thing? Amanda!
But the latest technology isn't always easy to use for people of a certain age.
These kids done bought me a busted machine again. Oh, yes, sir.
That's why Amazon partnered with AARP to present the new Amazon Echo Silver, the only smart speaker device designed specifically to be used by the greatest generation. It's super loud and responds to any name even remotely close to Alexa, so they can find out the weather.
Allegra, what is the weather outside?
It is 74 degrees and sunny.
Huh?
It is 74 degrees and sunny.
Where?
Outside.
What about it?
The temperature outside is 74 degrees and sunny.
I don't know about that.
The latest in sports.
Clarissa, how many did old Satchel strike out last night?
Satchel Paige died in 1982.
How many he get?
Satchel Paige is dead.
He what now?
Died.
Who did?
Satchel Paige.
I don't know about that.
Even local news and pop culture.
Anita, what them boys up to across the street?
They are just playing.
They what now?
They are just playing.
You say they just playing now?
Yes, they are just playing.
I don't know about that.
Pair it to smart devices like your thermostat.
Alessandra, turn the heat up.
The room is already 100 degrees.
Are you trying to kill me?
So I said it was going to be a little bit of fun. I got to keep you entertained, right? So jumping in further into the market, talked about this penetration in the United States, still a large part of the market, but here's what's most fascinating to me. A year ago, the second quarter of 2017, you see Amazon 3/4 of the entire global market. A year later, the same quarter, they're only 41%. And you see Google gaining, you see other gaining, you see with Alibaba and JD.com, 10% of that market is going to be China at this point. So Alibaba, the largest, JD.com, the second largest. E-retailers in China, JD.com earlier this year actually got $550 million from Google. So that's going to be their play. My attitude with technology is there's two global markets. There's the China market and there's the rest of the world. So we know that in China, they often don't let other technologies in. How many people have WhatsApp on their phone? Yep. So if you go to China, you can't use WhatsApp because it's so encrypted, the government can't spy on your conversations. So you have to use WeChat. Me personally, I can't use WeChat because last time I was there, it banned me for security reasons, not quite sure why. But with that said, don't feel bad for Amazon. They still experience 65% growth. But compare that to Google, over 400%, and the other category, over 533%. So this is an analyst prediction of where the market's headed by 2022. If you look at my background, I'm a financial analyst by background, and there's one thing that everybody knows about analysts. Their predictions are always more correlated to the past than they are to the future. But this gives you some idea. Me personally, I don't think we know who the winners are yet. This would port to say that the winners are Amazon and Google. But I would argue that one, the other category, 21%, that's going to include all of China. China is, that wasn't me. China is 20% of the global population. And I'm not saying they're going to be 20% of the smart speaker market, but that by itself is going to make that category bigger. But I'm going to argue that there are going to be platforms that may not even exist today that could eclipse what's going on here. So a couple things to be mindful of, and these are just some of my thoughts on this market, and then we're going to talk about brands and media outlets and hopefully give you some ideas on how you might think about these markets and advertising and accessing these markets as you go forward. But for me today, voice is going to easily take over a lot of those simple functions that we do, like, hey, what's the weather? I don't have to go on my phone. I can just ask, Alexa, or I can ask Google Home or Siri or Cortana. Though more complex interactions, you're still going to need that video. And eventually, of course, we already see with Alexa, they're incorporating screens in their smart speaker technology, though I would argue that's already going away from voice. But I think of things like the movers scratched my floors, and now I've got to figure out how to fix them. I need video because I need to pause that like 30 times and I need to rewind like 80 times so I do it correctly and don't get yelled at for a terrible job. But here's what's fascinating on a prediction, probably very true. $40 billion of retail to be conducted over voice by 2022 in 4 years. $40 billion. I'm guessing you're probably not going to do a real complex purchase on your voice like buying a car, but a lot of simple things like toilet paper or something like that is going to happen via your voice system. And then I believe to fully make voice valuable, voice is going to have to start interacting with other platforms. So as an example, I ask Alexa, hey, Alexa, what's the news today? It starts, and I'm like, oh man, am I late for work? And we know I don't like to be late. So I jump in my car. Well, listen, wouldn't it be great if it would just continue right there on my radio in the car? Really kind of an interesting potential for Apple because they have Apple Play incorporated in so many vehicles. So moving on, let's talk about brands. These are just some topics for discussion. It's clearly a nascent technology. How you're thinking about approaching this is going to be a work in progress. But I start with the first. Which device and how are you going to approach it? Because like the mobile OS systems, the voice systems are balkanized. Every system has its own set of rules, its own set of technology that you have to figure out how to access. And so to an extent, you as a brand or you as an agency have to come up with a strategy. And you're probably going to say, I'm not going to be on every device there is out there and have a strategy for each. So how do you pick the winners? And as I said, I personally am not sure Amazon will be the winner. So it seems like, oh, they will be because they had such a head start, and Google, to an extent, has the global platform. But think about mobile OS. You have iOS and you have Android, both of which have become the favorite for developers, and in fact, to the point that no other system can develop. However, both those systems were not the #1 system for smartphones in the world until after 2010. Before that, it was Symbian, the platform that Nokia was using. So if you were looking at this in 2008 or 2009, now apps hadn't fully developed because that was really an Apple play, but if you had been building a strategy and looking at the mobile phone market, you may have said, well, I'm going to pick the biggest platform there is. 4 years later, you would have been like, well, that was a waste of my money. So when you go into it, I would argue that you want to take an approach. You're going to have to experiment with different platforms, but you're also going to have to manage And I would suggest you do a little bit on each until you get more comfortable into the different systems that are available and you start understanding who are the winners and losers. Optimized search. Every conference, everything you read, this is all they're telling you, right? And I'm going to tell you it too. I mean, why wouldn't I? Because we know that when you're optimizing search online, you want to be on the first page. And if you're not on the first page, God, you better be on the second or third, right? And if you're not on that third, well, you're either doing nothing or you're wasting every dollar. Well, on voice, you better be first. Not the first page, you better be number one. And if you're not number one, you better be number two or maybe number three. Because no way is anyone sitting there listening to 60 different results. They're listening to maybe 3. People are lazy, right? So then I would say branding. In the world of digital advertising and what's happening more and more, even on linear, we're going to specific targeting of audiences, and agencies and brands have really moved away from thinking about branding for marketing and more of a call to action. I would argue that for voice, branding is going to be very important. I talk about toilet paper, right? So if I'm talking to Alexa, I'm saying, hey, I'm not going to say, Alexa, buy toilet paper unless she knows what I want. In my house, I got to ask for Charmin Ultra Soft. Now, if you're my mother, being that, German, you're asking for sandpaper. In other words, Scott toilet paper. But in my house, it's the Charmin. And in fact, just as a side note, my sister inherited my mother's desire for this horrible toilet paper. And when my niece came over, she's like, wow, he's got the good toilet paper. I scored some points, what can I tell you? So if you're the most well-known brand in a category, you're going to be the winner. It's just how it is. You're not going to get a chance to be filtered through. Talk about brand. And finally, personalization. This is your opportunity to have an interaction with a person in a way you've never had before, right? And I would argue you can do it in a way that drives people to interact with you beyond the voice. So think about it. The voice, it's so personal. I'm talking to this thing. It almost feels like it's a person. I mean, in fact, if I had played that whole Saturday Night Live clip, which was really long, it ends with saying it has an aha feature. So the guy's talking and she just keeps going, So to me, this is your opportunity. Now, I'm going to have an example, but as I told you, I'm a financial analyst by background, not creative. So this is an example, so use it for what it is. So one of the thoughts I had as an example of what you could do, you think on Alexa. So advertising today is very hard on these systems. You can do it, but there's a lot of rules, et cetera. But you can create these Alexa flash briefings, 5 to 10 minutes, a news item, et cetera. So I'm thinking I'm Audi, and I've got my new e-tron system. And it's their new electrical motor. They're not promoting diesel. I don't know if anyone here heard that, but they are promoting their new electric vehicle. I give a news briefing about electric motors, how it works, et cetera. I could have an interaction with somebody that starts talking to them after this news briefing and maybe encourages them to come down to my local dealership for a private tour. Maybe the dealerships have a mechanic on site who understands this. It's just, as a concept, you can actually start creating personalized experiences that tie into your brands and branding, but also move to action. So just, things to think about. Now, this is my bread and butter, media outlets. These are the people who pay our bills. So, I have to pay some homage to them. So you're a media outlet, and you're saying, oh, this thing is coming. Now, as we talked about, today, primarily the sales have been in the US, but it's changing rapidly. To me, when I think about it, it's a threat and an opportunity. The threat, I would argue, is biggest to AM/FM radio. Your local radio station has got to figure out how to become the choice on that speaker, because I don't know about people in here. I tend not to listen to my local radio anymore because it's just not sort of the music I listen to. I tend to go to Spotify or Pandora. And as you go to these smart speakers, that's going to become more and more common. Now, on the television side and other media, at least in the US, people are accessing news. And the television stations in this country have been creating 2-3-minute clips to get people at least to listen to their news almost as a marketing-driven concept. For me, I'm going to just jump around. If I'm a station, I'm thinking about how do I use this format to engage people beyond this smart speaker, because monetization's not that easy today. And I'm driving people to other outlets that I own where I know how to monetize. So I'm driving them to my OTT, I'm driving them to my television, I'm driving them to my digital properties. The second point here is think globally. This is also available in your digital properties as well. But for me, this is a great opportunity for you to have a much bigger market. So earlier this year, we released, this is an ad break, by the way, we released our product in Spanish, and we have full success and customer service in Spanish. And one of our clients in Central America, their digital properties, they have television, digital properties, print. Their digital properties make over half their views and half their money, not from their local markets, but in the United States. If you're Spanish publications, every single person on this planet who speaks Spanish is now your audience. And I would argue with voice, it's going to help increase that presence. And then finally, of course, with many things that you do, embedded content can occur with voice. So I do have another example that I think about. Again, not creative. I'm your local news. You say, hey, Alexa, what's going on? Give me the news breakdown. Murders, fires, puppies. I think that's what news is, right? It's something like that. I think about it like you could start creating tie-ins where in the morning, it would be common for me to ask for news from the device. But when I'm home at night, I tie that to my OTT device so that I then can get the final news update at the end of the evening. And so now suddenly, me as a publication am able to monetize that connection. Finally, I've hit upon a lot of these things, but I'm going to just mention two of them. Default settings. This sucks, right? Default settings. So in the United States, Google Home, the news default setting is NPR. How unfair is that to everybody else? Now, every single person who doesn't want to get their news from NPR, and I'm not saying that's me, NPR is great, but if I want to get my news from CNN, MSN, wherever, I have to jump through extra hurdles. And so this is something that publishers are going to have to work against. And then, of course, privacy. We already know privacy is an issue, right, when it comes to digital because of all the data we're collecting. These people are collecting tons of data. Is there anybody here who thinks their smart speaker is not listening to them? I mean, anybody. It is. I mean, even everything you own that's connected to your Wi-Fi is listening. Everyone knows what a Roomba is, the automated vacuum cleaner. If you connect it to your Wi-Fi, it will send the dimensions of your home and the placement of your furniture to the company so they can sell your data. So people hate this. And now I'm interacting with the device. It's so personal. And now you're taking my data? Come on, Alexa. I mean, and you know politicians are going to be on it. So I have one more clip, humorous, and then we'll move on to questions.
Playing jazz.
Playing jazz.
Smoothie.
Making smoothie.
Calendar.
No meetings today. Remember, dentist at 9:30.
Fire off.
Fire off.
Open door.
Door open.
And we're gonna do one more.
Fire. Open door.
Wrong voice command.
Open door.
Wrong voice command.
Open. Open door.
Repeat that.
Open door.
I didn't understand that.
Hey, open door.
Play on the floor.
Get over the floor. Open the door.
Wrong voice command. Error.
Hey there, with a rock. Open door. Open door. Open door. Higher.
Higher volume.
Higher.
Higher.
Now, who doesn't love J-Lo? So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Much appreciated. I'm not sure my mic is on yet, but I will talk loud. Oh, here we go. There we are. We're in. Wow, I love that. We started a few minutes late, so sorry about that with your German heritage. I apologise.
Furious.
But you did manage to get AI and toilet paper into the same
There you
presentation,
go.
so that is very good. Okay, does anyone have any questions? I thought it was a very interesting presentation, certainly to know about Aruba, the vacuum cleaner. I'm going to have to get my wife onto that one. That sounds quite exciting. Okay, any questions?
Hey, thanks. Very interesting. Question. Some advertisers have been taking on developing skills for the devices. What's your perspective on skills development and whether the only advantage behind it is, overcoming the search hurdle or even having possession of the data that otherwise would only stay within the devices ecosystem? So any advice, any thoughts there?
So it's interesting because I think for me, so the search is something I would do with my digital team. I mean, I think the search in some ways is going to be similar, though it would be interesting to see how the voice interaction maybe changes versus what people type. But where I think you need people, or at least a person to start understanding, every ecosystem has their own rules. I mean, they're just complex, and they're not even necessarily giving you all the data today, right? And so to understand how you might think about approaching each device is really going to take some time. And if you do have somebody on staff whose skill that is, you start preparing. And for me, it's not just preparing about the smart speaker, because this technology will move to a full interactive speaker versus video experience.
Do we have any more questions from the audience there? Good question there. Was that a suitable answer? Good, good. Someone must have some more questions about AI, or are you kind of blown away by the videos and the impact of the presentation?
Okay.
You were forecasting that for the next 4 years, we are going to see a huge growth on this type of technology. What do you think are the main constraints for, let's say, countries like Latin America to grow this type of technology? So normally, there is a cost involved on that. So what do you think would be our future in terms of developing countries adopting this technology?
So I would make the argument, the first challenge, of course, is language. And even in the United States, there's language issues that they've already shown that these speakers don't always understand different people's accents. And so I think as it moves, it's going to have to be cognizant that even within Spanish, you have multiple languages, multiple, words that people use. Like I said, I'm married to a Mexican, so I'm often cursed at with a word that apparently only Mexicans use. But I think from an adoption standpoint, it's going to be similar to the adoption route of a smartphone. I think eventually people are going to start adopting these technologies. They're actually much cheaper than mobile phones, and you do have cheaper versions coming out. So like Google has a cheaper version, and so I think some of these simpler versions will come and make a play into the market. But I also think, as I said before, you might have some things in developing worlds, and I don't think in the Latin American world because it's coming, but in other parts of the world where it will leapfrog directly to the video voice interaction.
From a Latin American perspective, how far away do you think it is from becoming far bigger part of the marketing campaigns that people are putting together here?
I would think, so I'm going to say it twofold, right? So if you as a Latin American company have a lot of exposure already in your digital properties here, I mean, like at my house, 40% of our program is in Spanish. So we access a lot of Latin American content. So if you're already developing or have that exposure in the US, then I would say you should start thinking about this now. I think from a country exposure in country, I think you'll see the same adoption probably within 3 years or so, you'll start seeing a good part of your population with the technology, if not sooner.
Interesting. Any more questions before we have our next session? Okay, let's have a round of applause for Mark. Yes.